Teller, it's got another free play coming your guys' way. And you know we're coming off another profitable event where we hit 2 of our 3 official plays for UFC Vegas 69. More importantly, the biggest play of the night, the free play that we threw your guys' way last week cashes a 5-unit play on Nasty Nas, Nazim Sadykhov to defeat Evan Elder. Now the fight played out a little bit closer than to be expected, but at the end of the day, Sadykhov opens up a massive cut over Elder's eye, getting that 3rd round TKO stoppage. Now, I'd be remiss if I don't mention the haters that slid into the comment section on that last video. But listen, guys, a W is a W. This is the fight game. You must give credit to the fighter that's going in there, landing impactful shots, opening up wounds like that on the opposition, okay? Yes, Elder did have some success in that fight as well, and he was arguably winning that fight going into the 3rd. I thought the 1st round was very close and it could have went either way. The 2nd round Elder took. I thought we were looking at some type of split decision going on there if this fight would have went to a decision, if Sadykhov could have took that 3rd round. But none of that matters. At the end of the day, again, Nasty Nas landing some big shots throughout that fight, opening up a massive wound on Evan Elder. We cash, and that's what it's all about here, and that's what you guys can continue to expect with these free plays. Now, moving forward for UFC Vegas 70, I gotta let you guys know, I love the value that's on the board. I have 18 units out, 5 official plays locked in. I'm expecting this to be one of the biggest events of the year, and we're only in February. I'm telling you guys, I love the value that's on the board here. You guys heard that right, 18 units on the board. And with that being said, we're taking a look at a matchup here of a UFC newcomer in Trevor Peak taking on Erick Gonzalez, a fighter that's 0-2 in the UFC. He's been fighting some stiff competition, and he's getting one more opportunity here. How is this fight going to play out?
Welcome to the show. This is the MMA fortune teller. Yeah.
The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.
So Trevor Peak looks to make his UFC debut this upcoming Saturday, coming off one of the most exhilarating victories we've seen on Dana White's Contender Series, where he had a massive comeback win over the highly touted prospect Malik Lewis, who was undefeated at the time. He was 5-0, and boy, what a fight that was. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend that you run the tape back on it. It was a crazy one. Now, Trevor Peak was supposed to be taking on Alex Reyes, but unfortunately, Alex did have to withdraw from the fight, so in steps Erick Gonzalez, a 2-time UFC veteran and a fighter that has 3 times the amount of experience that Trevor Peak has. So the books open Trevor Peak as a -175 favorite. You take a look at DraftKings right now, he's settled in as a -190 favorite. We've seen him as high as a -200 favorite on a multitude of books. So the masses seeing value in that -175 line on Trevor Peak. Now, this is nothing new. Fighters that have came off Dana White's Contender Series that have made a big splash, we've generally seen a lot of action coming their way as they work their way into the UFC. A lot of them come in hyped up, and that seems to be the case here with Trevor Peak. But is it warranted? So let's dive into the nitty-gritty when it comes to this UFC newcomer, Trevor Peak. He's only had 7 pro fights, and out of those 7 pro fights, he's only left the 1st round 2 times, finishing those 2 fights within the middle of the 2nd round. So he's never touched the 3rd round thus far. You know, there has to be some question marks about his cardio, you would think, right? But let's take a look into some of that action that we talk about there. In his fight on Dana White's Contender Series, as it made its way into the middle of the 2nd round, there was a crazy amount of output put in that 1st round. And as he worked his way into the 2nd round, he didn't even seem to be breathing that heavily. He seemed to be very calm and composed. And in fact, he was the fighter that was much more fresh as he eventually broke down the winded Malik Lewis. It's also worth noting that in Trevor Peak's most recent fight, before going into that Malik Lewis match, he knocked out UFC veteran Kama Worthy, a fighter that we've had the pleasure to interview here on the show. He knocked him out with just 15 seconds left in the 1st round. There was an extreme amount of output put out in that 1st round, and Trevor Peak seemed to be in complete control of his breathing. He seemed to be like he was in good shape going into that match. So once again, although there's not that major sample size of him going late into fights, my gut tells me that there's just not going to be a major issue with his conditioning. And once again, he showcased that he has some serious power knocking out Kama Worthy, but also showcased some wrestling ability, slamming Kama Worthy on his head. What about the Ghost Pepper, Erick Gonzalez? What does he bring to the table here against Trevor Peak? We already talked about the fact that he has 3 times the amount of pro experience as Trevor Peak. He's already had the pleasure to have stepped down in the octagon 2 times. Now, he was defeated in both of those matches, but let's also take into consideration the level of opponent that he was facing in both of those fights. He was fighting a future Hall of Famer in Jim Miller, who is somehow still doing his thing at the age that he's at. Other than that, he lost to Terrence McKinney. We know that McKinney's been on a little bit of a skid as of recently, but McKinney is a major threat in the division, and he was outgunned there. But do you really hold it against Gonzalez that much? Well, then let's take a look into what Gonzalez has been doing outside of the UFC with all that experience that we talked about. He is only 8-4 over at Combate. That's a record that really doesn't overly impress me. If we're talking about some of the fighters that have came out of Combate, working their way into the UFC, that have made a significant impact, the majority of those fighters have dominated that fight scene a little bit more so than an 8-4 record. Erick Gonzalez is a fighter that has consistently shown that he is there to take an L. I mean, he has his fair share of victories, but I haven't been overly impressed with the level of opponents there as well. So I just really haven't been that intrigued with the Ghost Pepper here. Now let's dive into the numbers here, taking into consideration that there is a limited amount of data to go on based on the fact that Trevor Peak only has that 1 UFC banner fight, while Erick Gonzalez only has those 2 UFC fights to go off of. But Trevor Peak landed 7.09 strikes per minute in that Malik Lewis fight, with 68% of those strikes being significant strikes. That is a very high percentage. We know that Trevor Peak puts a lot of oomph into his shots. Expect a lot of heavy overhand rights and a lot of powerful knees coming up the middle in the clinch here against Gonzalez. While on that same token, Erick Gonzalez defensively hasn't been that impressive, absorbing 6.65 strikes per minute with a 41% defensive rate. I haven't been overly impressed with him there. He is there to be hit. He is there to be taken down. I expect Trevor Peak to really be pushing the pace on him there. Now, Erick Gonzalez has shown offensively that he does put a decent amount of output there as well. But Trevor Peak has shown to have a granite chin, eating a huge shot from Malik Lewis, getting right back up to his feet and eventually taking over that round. I think that Trevor Peak will be able to eat anything that Erick Gonzalez throws his way. So where are we going with our action for this matchup? I'll let you guys know right now. I got another 5-unit play coming towards your guys' way. I locked in Trevor Peak at a -190 line. I threw 5 units at it. I know it's a little chalky, but I believe that the value is more than there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this line creep up towards the mid -200s on Peak. I think that Gonzalez is going to prove to just not be a UFC caliber opponent. He sees the opportunity here, jumping in on short notice, being able to step down in the octagon once again. But again, I just don't believe that he's a UFC caliber opponent. While on that same token, I think that Peak is going to prove that he is an extremely tough fighter that carries some serious power and does some things very well here. Now, like I said, the line is a little bit chalky. It's not that bad, but if you guys are looking for a better line, I think that you're going to want to target Peak inside the distance, which you should be able to shop right around that -135 line. I'm playing it a little bit more safe, and I'm just taking Peak to win this fight. So remember now, I got 18 units on the board, 5 official plays locked in for UFC Vegas 70. I'm expecting a huge night. Make sure you're following me on my social media to keep better up to date with me. On Instagram, MMAFortuneteller_, on Twitter at the MMA Teller. You can even shoot me an email at MMAFortuneteller@gmail.com. If you want to work with me for those official plays, reach out to me. I'll send you my pricing. I'm expecting a huge night. I hope you guys enjoyed this free play. Please like and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to send these free plays your guys' way here on YouTube. You guys are much appreciated. Enjoy the fights. Signing out. Teller.
Welcome to the show, this the MMA Fortune Teller. Yeah.
The MMA Fortune Teller.
The teller.